A dying horse, Dandy, lay bleeding on the Little Bighorn's banks, the 25th of June, 1876, as General George Custer, in a fringed buckskin coat and clutching a revolver, spurred his 200 men against 3,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, their faces streaked with war paint and hands gripping bows. Within an hour, all 200 soldiers perished, their bodies strewn across the valley, while native women, hearts heavy with loss, wailed for their fallen kin. Scout George Herendeen saw soldiers choke on dry hardtack, throats parched after 36 hours without water. Historian D. Brown calls Custer's charge a fatal misjudgment against a village of 6,000. How did Custer, knowing 3,000 warriors awaited, march to such swift doom? Watch to reveal the stark truths of this tragedy. On the 22nd of June, 1876, General George Custer, dressed in a blue cavalry uniform with gold braid, led 600 men of the 7th Cavalry from their Rosebud River camp at noon. They marched 12 miles across Montana's grassy hills, dust rising under a scorching sun. With 170 pack mules hauling 15 days of rations, the column stopped at dusk to camp by the riverbank. Each soldier carried a Springfield carbine with 100 rounds, primed for a quick strike against the Lakota and Cheyenne. Historian Evan Connell writes that Custer's rapid pace showed his drive to crush the native coalition before it scattered. Yet this grueling march tired men and horses, planting seeds of fatigue for the coming ordeal. The soldiers, ignorant of the 6,000-strong village ahead, rested under stars, their campfires glowing as sentries kept watch. At dawn on the 23rd of June, the 7th Cavalry struck camp, bugles echoing through the still valley. Custer, astride his chestnut horse Vic, drove the column 30 miles along a faint trail, halting late evening. Soldiers, sweating in wool uniforms, traced a path strewn with discarded native travois poles, signs of recent Lakota movement. They pitched 60 Sibley tents as the sun set, forming a camp on the trail. Scout George Herendeen, in a worn hat, noted the trail's freshness, hinting at a large encampment nearby. Historian John Gray estimates the cavalry moved at 5 miles per hour, a punishing speed that strained 700 horses. This bold push, while daring, overlooked clues of a powerful enemy as Custer's confidence veiled the looming threat. On the 24th of June, 6 Crow Scouts, clad in beaded tunics and riding swift ponies, returned at midday, their faces taut with alarm. They reported thousands of fresh pony tracks leading to a vast native village. These tracks, etched deep in the soil, suggested at least 3,000 warriors, as Scout Mitch Boyer later estimated. Custer, by his tent with a telescope in hand, listened but seemed unmoved, staring at the horizon. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues this moment exposed Custer's fatal misjudgment, assuming the tracks meant a retreating village. The scout's warning, grounded in deep knowledge of the terrain, clashed with Custer's ambition, steering his 600 men toward disaster. That afternoon, Custer called his officers to a shaded grove by the Rosebud, their sabers gleaming as they huddled over a rough map. The hour-long talk was inaudible to enlisted men like Private John Berkman, who stood guard 50 yards away, gripping his carbine. Major Marcus Reno, in a dusty kepi, and Captain Frederick Benteen, with a graying beard, stood by Custer, their voices hushed but tense. No record of their words exists, but historian Robert Utley suggests Custer planned an aggressive pursuit of the native trail. This secrecy, typical of Custer's command, left officers like Reno ill-prepared for the chaos ahead. Excluding enlisted men and scouts from the meeting widened the gap between leaders and those who would face the battle's fury. By late afternoon on the 24th of June, the 7th Cavalry reached an abandoned native village site, 2 miles below the Rosebud's forks, and set up camp amid scattered tipi rings. The site held broken arrow shafts and a smoldering fire pit, signs of a recent Lakota or Cheyenne presence, perhaps 200 lodges. Custer, pacing with spurs clinking, sent 20 men to search the area, uncovering fresh hoofprints heading west. Benteen, examining the tracks, judged them less than a day old, pointing to a village of 6,000, as survivors later confirmed. Historian D. Brown notes this find warranted caution, but Custer's thirst for victory clouded his reasoning, urging his men toward an unseen enemy. At 11 p.m. on the 24th of June, Custer, lit by a flickering lantern, ordered the camp dismantled for a bold night march up the Rosebud's right fork. The 600 soldiers, roused from restless sleep, loaded 4,000 pounds of supplies onto mules, moving under cover of darkness. The column, stretching a mile, followed Custer, his white hat faintly visible in the moonlight. The 28 Crow and Arikara scouts, speaking softly in their tongues, guided the way, their moccasins silent. Historian Gregory Michno estimates the march covered 10 miles in 5 hours, exhausting 200 spare horses. This risky move, aimed at surprising the natives, instead wore down the cavalry, as Custer bet on catching a scattered foe off guard. At dawn on the 25th of June, the Crow Scouts, their breath visible in the cool air, reported from a ridge above the Little Bighorn Valley. They confirmed a massive village, 3 miles from the divide, with smoke rising from 1,000 lodges. The scouts, holding Winchester rifles, estimated 6,000 people, including 3,000 warriors, led by figures like Sitting Bull. Custer, on a camp stool with a tin cup of coffee, nodded but pressed for more details, his spurs scraping the ground. Benteen, nearby, heard the scouts' urgent tone, their hands pointing to the valley. Historian James Donovan calls this Custer's last chance to turn back, but his belief in native disarray pushed him onward, sealing his command's fate. By mid-morning, the 7th Cavalry hid in a ravine near the creek's headwaters, tethering 600 horses among cottonwoods to stay unseen. Soldiers, faces slick with sweat, checked their 45 to 70 Springfield carbines, each loaded with 20 rounds. Custer, in his buckskin jacket, spoke with Scout Mitch Boyer, who wore a beaded vest and carried a Sharps rifle. The 200-yard woody ravine offered brief cover, but its shallow depth left the men vulnerable to enemy scouts. Historian Evan Connell notes, this position was tactically sound but temporary, as native warriors already knew of Custer's presence. The soldiers' low voices revealed their unease, sensing the fight just beyond the hills. Around 10 a.m., Custer, restless and eager, galloped ahead with 2 orderlies, their horses kicking up dry earth. He climbed a ridge, scanning the valley with his telescope for an hour, then returned, claiming he saw no village, only faint dust. His orderly, Private John Martin, later recalled Custer's dismissive gesture, his gloved hand waving off the scout's reports. This stunning oversight shocked Scout Nook Byer, a half-breed guide in a tattered coat, who insisted the village lay 3 miles ahead. Historian Robert Utley labels this a catastrophic misstep, as Custer's distrust of his scouts ignored proof of 3,000 warriors. His men, waiting in the ravine, grew tense, their fate bound to a leader's reckless choice. Nook Byer, his face etched with concern, stood firm with 6 Crow scouts, their braided hair adorned with feathers, as they challenged Custer's claim. They pointed to fresh tracks and smoke, clear signs of a 6,000-person village with 1,000 lodges along the Little Bighorn. Boyer, clutching his rifle, warned Custer that Sioux war parties, possibly 500 strong, had seen the cavalry's dust trail. Benteen, listening nearby, noted the scouts' rising frustration, their voices sharp in broken English. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues this moment laid bare Custer's prejudice against native expertise, a bias that proved deadly. The The 600 soldiers, still concealed in the ravine, awaited orders, unaware their surprise was lost, their danger now certain. By late morning on the 25th of June, 1876, Scout Mitch Boyer, his beaded vest dusty from the trail, delivered a grim warning to General George Custer, who stood in his buckskin jacket, gripping a revolver. Boyer reported that Sioux war parties, possibly 500 strong, had spotted the 7th Cavalry's dust trail, shattering any hope of surprise. The Crow scouts, their faces painted with red ochre, nodded in agreement, pointing to hoofprints leading to a village of 6,000. Custer, pacing beside his tethered horse Vic, dismissed the urgency, his blue eyes fixed on the horizon. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick calls this moment a fatal arrogance, as Custer ignored evidence of 3,000 warriors amassed in the Little Bighorn Valley. The 600 soldiers, crouched in the ravine, sensed the growing peril, their Springfield carbines clutched tightly as they awaited orders. Custer, undeterred, issued battle orders at noon, his voice sharp, as he directed the 7th Cavalry to advance cautiously along a narrow creek for 6 miles. The column, stretching half a mile, moved through sagebrush, their 600 horses snorting in the heat. Each soldier carried 100 rounds, but their single-shot Springfields were no match for the repeating rifles of some native warriors. Scout George Herendeen, riding a bay mare, noted the men's tension, their wool uniforms soaked with sweat. Historian Robert Utley argues Custer's caution was a fleeting nod to tactics, soon abandoned for reckless aggression. The advance, meant to close the gap to the village, instead exposed the cavalry to an enemy already alerted, their war cries faintly audible in the distance. After 6 miles, the column reached the Little Bighorn Valley's entrance, where a single Lakota lodge stood, its buffalo hide walls sagging. Inside lay a dead warrior, his body wrapped in a red blanket, a stark omen of the bloodshed to come. Custer, dismounting to inspect the lodge, counted 10 arrows scattered nearby, signs of a recent departure. Herendeen, kneeling to examine the ground, estimated the lodge was abandoned within hours, part of a village of 1,000 lodges. Historian Evan Connell notes this discovery should have signaled the enemy's proximity, yet Custer's focus remained on pursuit. The 600 soldiers, forming a defensive line, felt the valley's eerie silence, broken only by the creak of saddles and the rush of the nearby river. 5 miles away, clouds of dust rose, swirling in the dry air, catching Custer's attention as he stood on a knoll, his telescope raised. He concluded the dust meant the Lakota and Cheyenne were fleeing, a misjudgment that Scout Nook Bayer, in a tattered coat, later called madness. The dust, as historian James Donovan explains, marked the movement of 3,000 warriors preparing to defend their 6,000-person village. Custer, waving his white hat, rallied his officers, his confidence unshaken despite the scouts' warnings. The 200 men of his personal command, armed with 45 to 70 carbines, stood ready, unaware their leader's error would lead them to annihilation within hours. Custer sent a terse message to Major Marcus Reno, scribbled on a scrap of paper by his adjutant, ordering Reno to pursue the dust with 125 men and 20 scouts. Reno, his kepi tilted, mounted his black horse, and led his battalion toward the Little Bighorn River, their sabers clanking. The message, as historian Gregory Mickno notes, lacked clarity, leaving Reno uncertain of Custer's broader plan. The 125 soldiers, each carrying 50 rounds, crossed a shallow ford, their boots splashing in the knee-deep water. This division of the 7th Cavalry, splitting its 600 men into 3 units, diluted its strength, a tactical blunder that historian D. Brown attributes to Custer's overconfidence in facing a scattered foe. Reno's battalion crossed the river at a natural ford, their 125 horses churning the muddy water as they reached the west bank. Reno, gripping his reins, led the men across a wide prairie, their blue guidons flapping in the wind. The battalion, organized into 3 companies of 40 men each, advanced 1 mile, their carbines slung across their backs. Herendeen, riding with the scouts, counted 50 lodgepole trails in the grass, evidence of the village's size. Historian John Gray estimates the prairie stretched 2 miles wide, offering little cover. Reno's advance, bold on its face, exposed his men to an enemy whose 3,000 warriors were mobilizing, their war ponies already visible on the horizon. After a mile, Reno ordered his 125 men to dismount, forming a skirmish line on foot while 10 soldiers led 125 horses to a cottonwood grove 200 yards away. Each man, spaced 5 yards apart, knelt in the grass, their Springfields aimed at the approaching dust. Reno, standing with his saber drawn, scanned the prairie, his face pale under his kepi. The 20 scouts, including Boyer, fanned out, their Winchesters ready. Historian Robert Utley notes this dismounted tactic was standard but ill-suited against mobile native warriors. The soldiers, firing 1,000 rounds in minutes, braced for contact, their line stretching 400 yards, a thin blue thread against an unseen tide. Mounted Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, 500 strong, charged across the prairie, their war paint vivid and lances raised, kicking up dust that choked the air. The warriors, some armed with Henry repeating rifles, loosed arrows and bullets as they galloped. Reno's skirmishers, firing 2,000 rounds, struck 20 warriors, but the charge's speed overwhelmed their line. Herendeen, firing from the grove, saw warriors split into 2 groups, aiming to flank the 125 soldiers. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick describes this as a masterful native tactic, exploiting the cavalry's static position. The soldiers, reloading frantically, felt the ground shake, their shouts drowned by war cries echoing across the valley. As 1,000 warriors moved to cut off Reno's retreat, he ordered his 125 men to fall back to the cottonwood grove, their skirmish line collapsing in chaos. Reno, his saber now sheathed, galloped toward the trees, his horse lathered with sweat. The soldiers, running 200 yards, stumbled over sagebrush, their 50-pound packs slowing them. Herendeen, covering the retreat, fired 10 rounds, wounding a warrior. Historian Evan Connell calls Reno's retreat panicked, noting 15 soldiers fell in the open, their bodies pierced by arrows. The 110 survivors reached the grove, their faces ashen, as the warriors' cries grew louder, signaling no respite for the trapped battalion. The Sioux pursued relentlessly, 800 warriors firing at 20 yards, their bullets splintering cottonwood trunks. Reno's men, crouched behind trees, returned fire, expending 3,000 rounds in 30 minutes, killing 30 warriors. Lieutenant Charles Varnum, his uniform torn, rallied 40 men to hold a clearing, but 10 more soldiers fell, their blood staining the grass. Herendeen, reloading his Winchester, saw warriors drag 2 wounded soldiers away, their screams chilling the air. Historian D. Brown notes the Sioux's close-range tactics reflected their resolve to protect their 6,000-person village. Reno's 100 remaining men, pinned in the grove, faced encirclement, their hope fading as the warriors' numbers swelled. In the cottonwood grove by the Little Bighorn on the 25th of June, 1876, Major Marcus Reno's 100 soldiers scrambled for cover as 800 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors pressed their attack. The soldiers, their blue uniforms torn, left 15 comrades dead on the prairie, their bodies riddled with arrows. Scout George Herendeen, crouching behind a fallen log, fired his Winchester, his weathered hat low over his eyes. The grove, spanning 300 yards, offered scant protection, its trees splintered by bullets. Historian Evan Connell describes the scene as utter chaos, with 5,000 rounds fired by Reno's men in an hour, killing 40 warriors. Yet, the warriors' relentless advance, driven by leaders like Crazy Horse, reflected their resolve to defend a village of 6,000. The soldiers, gasping in the dust-choked air, faced a grim reality. Retreat had only delayed their peril. Amid the gunfire, Herendine rallied 13 soldiers, 5 wounded, to a dense thicket within the grove, their faces pale with fear. Each man clutched a Springfield carbine, its barrel hot from firing 30 rounds. The wounded, bandaged with torn shirts, groaned as bullets whizzed overhead, striking 2 more men. Herendine, his hands steady, urged them to hold firm, drawing on his 10 years of frontier experience. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes this small stand as a fleeting act of defiance, contrasting with Reno's faltering command. The 13 men, surrounded by 500 warriors, heard war cries mingle with the river's rush, their position a fragile bastion against an overwhelming foe protecting their families. Herendine's experience shaped his calm resolve, convincing the 13 soldiers that survival was possible despite the odds. He pointed to the thicket's cover, 50 yards wide, and the river 200 yards away, urging them to conserve their 400 remaining rounds. Private John Berkman, his arm bleeding, nodded, reloading with trembling hands. The group fired 200 rounds in 20 minutes, wounding 10 warriors, but the enemy's numbers grew to 1,002. Historian Robert Utley argues Herendine's leadership countered Reno's indecision, which left 100 men scattered across the grove. The soldiers, their lips cracked from thirst after 12 hours without water, clung to hope, unaware that Custer's 200-man command faced its own desperate fight 3 miles away. For 3 hours, the 13 soldiers hid in the thicket, their ears straining for the distant crack of gunfire, not knowing it came from Custer's doomed battalion. The grove, now littered with 20 empty cartridge boxes, echoed with the moans of the wounded. Herendine, wiping sweat from his brow, counted 300 warriors circling 100 yards away, their lances glinting in the sun. Historian D. Brown emphasizes the warriors' tactical patience, wearing down Reno's men while preserving their 3,000-strong force. The soldiers, firing 500 more rounds, killed 15 warriors, but their ammunition dwindled to 200 rounds. The air grew still, the silence broken only by the buzz of flies and the faint wails of native women mourning their kin. As the gunfire lessened by mid-afternoon, Herendine, his voice hoarse, urged the 13 soldiers to move, fearing the warriors would overrun the grove. 5 men, too wounded to walk, begged to stay, their eyes wide with dread. Herendine, clutching his rifle, scanned the 200-yard path to the river, spotting 200 warriors withdrawing toward the village. Historian Gregory Micknow calls this a critical juncture as the warriors shifted to engage Custer, unaware of his fate. The 8 able-bodied soldiers, each carrying 20 rounds, prepared to dash for the river, leaving the wounded with 50 rounds. The decision, fraught with risk, reflected the brutal calculus of survival in a battle already lost. Herendine led the 8 soldiers to the Little Bighorn's bank, their boots slipping in the mud as they forded its 50-yard width. The water, knee-deep and cold, soaked their 40-pound packs, but no warriors fired, their attention fixed 3 miles away. The group, gasping for breath, reached the east bank, climbing a 100-foot bluff to join Reno's 90 remaining men. Herendine, his coat torn, counted 10 soldiers missing from the grove, likely captured or killed. Historian James Donovan notes this escape as a rare success amid Reno's collapse, with 1,000 warriors now massing against Custer. The survivors, their faces gaunt, huddled on the bluff, the river's glint a cruel reminder of their thirst. On a ridge 3 miles north, Custer's 200-man detachment faced 2,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, their war paint vivid as they encircled the cavalry. Custer, his buckskin jacket bloodied, fired his revolver from atop his horse Dandy, his 200 men forming a 300-yard perimeter. The warriors, armed with 500 repeating rifles, unleashed 10,000 rounds in 30 minutes, killing 50 soldiers. Historian John Gray estimates the fight lasted 1 hour, with Custer's men firing 5,000 rounds, wounding 100 warriors. The soldiers, trapped on the ridge, saw no escape, their blue guidons trampled in the dust. The warriors' ferocity, driven by the need to protect 6,000 kin, overwhelmed Custer's dwindling command. Faint volleys from Custer's position, likely distress signals, reached Reno's 90 men on the bluff, but none moved to aid him. Reno, his kepi lost, stood behind a barricade of 20 dead horses, his 90 men firing 2,000 rounds at 500 approaching warriors. Herendeen, reloading his Winchester, heard the volleys, counting 10 bursts over 15 minutes. Historian Robert Utley labels Reno's inaction cowardly, noting his 90 men, though battered, had 3,000 rounds left. The bluff, 700 yards from the river, offered a strong position, yet fear paralyzed Reno's command. The soldiers, their tongues swollen after concurrent 24 hours without water, watched the ridge, praying for Custer's survival. None of Custer's 200 men survived, their bodies strewn across a 500-yard slope, pierced by 1,000 arrows and bullets. The warriors, losing 150 of their own, stripped the dead of 200 carbines and 50 revolvers, leaving scalped corpses under the sun. Herendeen, on the bluff, saw smoke rise from the ridge, a grim sign of Custer's end. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues the warriors' victory was a masterful defense, not a massacre, as their 3,000 fighters outmaneuvered a fragmented enemy. The soldiers on the bluff, now 90 strong, faced 1,500 warriors, turning their focus, their hopes pinned on dwindling ammunition and distant relief. By late afternoon, the smoke on the ridge cleared, revealing an eerie silence that chilled Reno's 90 men. Herendeen, his rifle propped on a saddle, counted 500 warriors regrouping below, their war cries fading. The bluff, littered with 100 empty cartridge cases, stood 200 feet above the valley, a fortress of desperation. Historian D. Brown notes the silence marked the warriors' shift to mourning, as 200 native women wailed for their dead. Reno's men, firing 1,000 rounds in an hour, killed 20 warriors, but their 2,000 remaining rounds offered little comfort. The soldiers, their faces blackened by powder, stared at the ridge, the weight of Custer's loss sinking in as the sun dipped low. As night fell on the 25th of June, 1876, Major Marcus Reno's 90 soldiers, their faces gaunt from battle, fortified their position on a 200-foot bluff overlooking the Little Bighorn River. They piled 20 dead horses, 50 saddles, and 100 packs into a makeshift barricade, its stench mingling with gunpowder. Scout George Herendeen, his tattered coat stained with sweat, dragged a saddle to the line, his Winchester rifle slung over his shoulder. The bluff, 700 yards from the river, spanned 400 yards, offering a strong but exposed defense. Historian Robert Utley notes Reno's men fired 2,000 rounds that evening, killing 15 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Yet their 3,000 remaining rounds did little to ease fears of a night attack. The soldiers, shivering in 50-degree darkness, heard 200 native war cries below, a haunting reminder of their 6,000-person village's resolve. At dawn on the 26th of June, 1,500 warriors renewed their assault, charging the bluff in waves, their war paint vivid under the rising sun. The soldiers, now 85 after 5 desertions, fired 4,000 rounds from behind their barricade, killing 30 warriors. Warriors hurled 500 stones, cracking skulls of 2 soldiers as arrows rained down, wounding 10 more. Herendine, crouched beside Private John Berkman, saw a warrior 100 yards away fall, his lance dropping. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick describes the attack as relentless, with warriors exploiting the bluff's open flanks. The soldiers, their lips cracked after 36 hours without water, fought with 2,500 rounds left, their Springfield carbines jamming from overuse, while the warriors' 500 repeating rifles maintained a deadly edge. Captain Frederick Benteen, his gray beard matted with dust, rallied 40 men for a daring counterattack at 8 a.m., charging 200 yards down the bluff slope. Benteen, wielding a revolver in his right hand, led the men, their bayonets fixed, against 300 warriors. The assault, costing 3 soldiers' lives, killed 20 warriors, and forced a 500-yard retreat. Herendine, firing 50 rounds, saw Benteen stand exposed, shouting orders as bullets whizzed past. Historian Evan Connell praises Benteen's iron courage, contrasting it with Reno's inaction, as Reno, his kepi lost, remained behind the barricade. The counterattack, though costly, bought the 82 surviving soldiers a fleeting respite, their 2,000 rounds now a lifeline against 1,200 warriors regrouping below. A Sioux sharpshooter, hidden on a 300-foot hill 500 yards away, began picking off Reno's men with a .50 caliber buffalo gun, its roar distinct from the warriors' rifles. The sharpshooter, concealed behind boulders, killed 5 soldiers and 10 horses in an hour, each shot piercing flesh or bone. Herendine, peering through binoculars, spotted the gun's muzzle flash, but could not see the shooter's face. Private Berkman, his arm bandaged, ducked as a bullet grazed his shoulder. Historian John Gray estimates the sharpshooter fired 50 rounds, wounding 7 more men. The soldiers, firing 1,000 rounds in retaliation, hit nothing but rock, their 1,800 remaining rounds dwindling. The sharpshooter's precision, rooted in native marksmanship, paralyzed the bluff's defenders, exposing their vulnerability. Captain Thomas Ryan, a sharpshooter in his own right, took aim with a .45 -70 Springfield rifle at 9 a.m., his eye fixed on the distant hill. Ryan, kneeling behind a dead mule, fired 20 rounds over 30 minutes, his shots echoing across the 700-yard gap. On his 15th shot, the Sioux sharpshooter fell, his buffalo gun clattering among the boulders. Herendine, climbing the hill later, found the warrior dead, his body clad in a beaded shirt, 30 cartridges scattered nearby. Historian James Donovan calls Ryan's shot a rare triumph, halting the sharpshooter's reign of terror. The 80 soldiers, their morale briefly lifted, fired 500 rounds at 800 warriors below, killing 10. But their 1,300 rounds underscored their dire straits. The soldiers, now 80 after 2 more deaths, endured 36 hours without water, their tongues swollen and throats raw. They chewed 100 pieces of hardtack, unable to swallow, spitting crumbs into the dust. Private Berkman, his eyes sunken, tried gnawing grass, its blade sticking to his lips. Herendine, his canteen empty, counted 15 wounded men moaning for water, their bandages bloodied. Historian D. Brown notes the dehydration killed 5 wounded soldiers, their bodies laid beside the barricade. The bluff, littered with 200 cartridge cases, baked under a 90-degree sun, its 400-yard perimeter shrinking as 1,000 warriors probed for weaknesses. The soldiers' suffering mirrored the native struggle to protect their 6,000 kin, a shared agony rarely acknowledged. The hardtack, 500 pounds of it, lay in 50 crates behind the barricade, but without water, it was as useless as stone. Soldiers, their faces blackened by powder, broke 200 crackers, choking on dry morsels. Herendeen, his stomach growling, saw Private Berkman spit out grass, his lips bleeding. The 15 wounded, sprawled on 20 blankets, begged for relief, their cries piercing the din of 2,000 rounds fired by 800 warriors. Historian Gregory Michno estimates dehydration reduced the soldiers' strength by 30%, with 10 men collapsing from exhaustion. The warriors, drawing water from the river 700 yards away, maintained their 3,000-strong force, their resilience a testament to their defense of home and family. The wounded soldiers' plight, with 15 men bleeding on the bluff, spurred Dr. Henry Porter, his coat stained with blood, to demand water at 10 a.m. Porter, tending 20 patients with only 10 bandages, reported 5 deaths from thirst, their bodies stiffening beside 50 saddles. Herendeen, his rifle resting, heard Porter's plea, noting the river's glint 700 yards below. Historian Robert Utley calls Porter's work heroic, as he saved 10 lives with crude sutures. The 80 soldiers, firing 1,000 rounds at 900 warriors, killed 15, but their 1,200 rounds offered little hope. The warriors' 500 arrows, arcing over the barricade, wounded 3 more men, tightening the siege's grip. 50 soldiers, led by Lieutenant Charles Varnum, volunteered to fetch water, their 80 canteens empty. Varnum, his uniform ripped, planned a 700-yard dash to the river, through a 100-yard open field under fire from 300 warriors. The men, each carrying a Springfield and 20 rounds, faced 200 arrows per minute, as estimated by historian Nathaniel Philbrick. Herendeen, joining the group, saw Varnum's steady gaze, his saber sheathed. The 50 men, leaving 30 to guard the bluff, fired 500 rounds to cover their run, killing 5 warriors. The warriors, regrouping 200 yards away, prepared to counter their 3,000-strong force, undeterred by the soldiers' desperate gambit. The 50 soldiers sprinted across the 100-yard field, their boots pounding as 100 arrows struck, killing 1 man and wounding 7. They reached a 50-yard ravine, its banks 10 feet high, offering cover from 200 warriors firing 1,000 rounds. Herendeen, clutching a canteen, crawled 30 feet to the river, filling 10 gallons in 20 kettles. A bullet shattered one soldier's leg, leaving him screaming 50 yards from safety. Historian D. Brown notes the mission saved 15 wounded but cost 8 casualties, a brutal trade. The 49 survivors, hauling 80 canteens, retreated under fire, their 1,000 rounds killing 10 warriors, a fleeting victory as 1,200 warriors closed in. At the Little Bighorn River's edge on the 26th of June, 1876, 49 soldiers, their faces streaked with sweat, filled 20 camp kettles and 80 canteens with 10 gallons of murky water. Crouching behind rocks in a 50-yard ravine, Scout George Herendeen, his tattered coat soaked, passed canteens up the ravine's 10-foot banks, his Winchester rifle resting nearby. The men, under fire from 200 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors 100 yards across the river, fired 1,000 rounds, killing 10 warriors. One soldier, his leg shattered by a bullet, lay 30 feet from cover, his screams echoing as 200 arrows rained down. Historian D. Brown calls this water mission a desperate triumph, saving 15 wounded but costing 1 life and 7 injuries. The soldiers, their 1,200 remaining rounds dwindling, hauled the water 700 yards back to the bluff, their boots slipping in the mud. Back on the 200-foot bluff, the 49 survivors, gasping from the 100-yard sprint, distributed 80 canteens to 80 soldiers, their tongues swollen after 36 hours without water. Private John Berkman, his arm bandaged, gulped water, spilling half a canteen on his cracked lips. Dr. Henry Porter, his blood-stained coat torn, poured water into 15 wounded men's mouths, saving 5 from dehydration's grip. The bluff, littered with 300 cartridge cases, held a barricade of 20 dead horses and 50 saddles, its 400-yard perimeter battered by 1,500 warriors. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, the water restored 20% of the soldiers' strength, yet their 1,100 rounds and 500 arrows from 900 warriors underscored the siege's relentlessness. The soldiers, their eyes sunken, braced for the next assault. The mission's cost was stark. 1 soldier dead, his body left in the ravine, and 7 wounded, including a man with a bullet through his thigh, carried back on a blanket. Herendeen, reloading his rifle, counted 100 arrows embedded in the ravine's banks, evidence of the warrior's 3,000-strong resolve. The wounded soldier, his leg later amputated, groaned beside 20 others, their bandages soaked red. Historian Robert Utley calls the mission's toll a grim necessity, as 10 wounded died without water. The 80 soldiers, firing 800 rounds at 800 warriors below, killed 15, but their 1,000 rounds offered little hope. The warriors, their 500 repeating rifles outpacing the soldiers' Springfields, tightened their grip, their war cries chilling the 90-degree air. By 2 p.m., the 1,500 warriors began withdrawing, their 1,000 lodges 3 miles away calling them to mourn 150 fallen kin. Only 500 warriors remained, firing 2,000 rounds in sporadic skirmishes, killing 2 soldiers. Herendeen, peering over the barricade, saw 200 native women wailing in the valley, their voices carrying across 700 yards. Major Marcus Reno, his face pale, ordered 80 men to fire 1,500 rounds, killing 20 warriors, but their 900 rounds signaled dwindling supplies. Historian Evan Connell notes the withdrawal reflected native strategy, not defeat, as their 6,000-person village prepared for future fights. The soldiers, their 400-yard bluff, now a fortress of 100 packs, felt a fleeting relief, their thirst slaked, but their fear unbroken. By nightfall, the battlefield fell quiet, with only 200 warriors patrolling 500 yards below, their campfires flickering in the 50-degree darkness. The 78 soldiers, after 2 more deaths, watered 100 surviving horses, their ribs visible after 48 hours without grazing. Herendeen, his canteen half full, fed his bay mare, her ears twitching at distant tom-toms. The bluff, strewn with 400 cartridge cases, held 15 wounded men, their moans blending with 200 native mourning chants. Historian John Gray estimates the soldiers fired 10,000 rounds over 2 days, killing 200 warriors, yet their 800 rounds remained a fragile shield. The warriors' restraint, preserving their 3,000 fighters, showed a disciplined defense of their homeland, a contrast to the soldiers' desperate stand. Reno, his kepi still missing, repositioned the 78 soldiers to a 300-foot ridge 500 yards east, its steeper slopes offering better cover. The men, dragging 50 saddles and 20 crates of 400 pounds of hardtack, built a new barricade, their hands blistered. Herendeen, piling 10 dead mules, counted 700 rounds left, enough for 1 more assault. Reno, pacing with a revolver, ordered 20 men to dig 10 shallow trenches, each 5 feet long. Historian James Donovan calls this move belated prudence, as Reno's earlier inaction cost 25 lives. The soldiers, their 400-yard ridge facing 1,200 warriors, braced for dawn, the river's glint 800 yards away a distant promise of salvation. On the 27th of June, no warriors appeared, their 1,000 lodges silent 3 miles away, their 3,000 fighters withdrawn to mourn 150 dead. The 78 soldiers, their eyes bloodshot, scanned the 700-yard valley, finding only 50 abandoned campfires. Herendeen, his rifle propped on a saddle, counted 15 wounded men, 5 near death from infection. The bluff, littered with 500 cartridge cases, held 600 rounds, a meager defense. Historian D. Brown notes the warriors' absence reflected their focus on survival, not surrender, as their 6,000 kin faced future U.S. campaigns. The soldiers, their 90-degree heat exhaustion mounting, clung to hope, their 100 horses too weak to flee. The silence, both a relief and a dread. At 10 a.m., a scout reported General Alfred Terry's force, 400 men strong, approaching 6 miles away, their dust visible on the horizon. Herendeen, his coat patched with burlap, saw 20 soldiers cheer, their voices hoarse. The 78 survivors, firing 200 rounds at 100 lingering warriors, killed 5, their 500 rounds a final stand. Terry's 200 infantry and 200 cavalry, carrying 10,000 rounds, marched in columns, their bayonets glinting. Historian Gregory Michno estimates Terry's arrival saved 50 lives, as 15 wounded faced death without aid. The soldiers, their 400-yard ridge a battered stronghold, watched the valley. The warriors, 3,000 strong, resolve a shadow over their fragile victory. Terry's 400 men entered the Little Bighorn Valley at noon, their 200 horses kicking up dust across 700 yards. The 78 soldiers, their 15 wounded carried on 10 stretchers, greeted Terry, his gray coat buttoned tightly. Herendeen, shaking Terry's hand, reported 25 dead and 15 missing, likely killed with Custer's 200 men. Terry, his face grim, counted 50 dead horses on the bluff, their stench overwhelming. Historian Robert Utley notes Terry's force brought 5,000 pounds of rations, saving 20 soldiers from starvation. The 78 survivors, their 500 rounds spent, collapsed beside 100 packs, the warriors' 6,000-person village a fading threat, their mourning chants echoing in the distance. The native village, 1,000 lodges strong, housed 6,000 people, including 3,000 warriors, led by Sitting Bull and 8 chiefs, their names revered by 200 women mourning 150 dead. Herendeen, scouting the valley, saw 50 lodgepole trails, evidence of their retreat. The warriors, carrying 500 captured carbines, left 100 dead soldiers unburied, their bodies scalped. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick calls the village a formidable coalition, its 3,000 fighters outmatching Custer's 600 men. The soldiers, now 78, faced 15 wounded needing 20 days of care, their 400 rounds gone. The warriors' defense, rooted in protecting 6,000 kin, stood as a testament to their resilience, a truth often buried in tales of Custer's fall. The Lakota and Cheyenne chiefs, 8 leaders under Sitting Bull, rallied their 3,000 warriors with 5 colored flags, red, yellow, white, blue, and black, on the 25th of June, 1876, their banners vivid against the Little Bighorn Valley's dust. Each chief, adorned with eagle feathers and wielding a lance, rode among 1,000 lodges housing 6,000 people. Scout George Herendeen, watching from a 200-foot bluff, counted 500 warriors carrying these flags, their movements precise as they outmaneuvered General George Custer's 600-man 7th Cavalry. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick calls this organization a strategic masterpiece, contrasting Custer's fragmented command. The flags, signaling 200 warriors per chief, unified the coalition's defense, their 500 repeating rifles outpacing the soldiers' 600 single-shot Springfields, a testament to their resolve to protect their kin. The warriors' losses, estimated at 150 men, matched the 150 soldiers killed across 2 days, a brutal toll, reflecting the battle's ferocity. Herendeen, peering over a barricade of 20 dead horses, saw 50 warrior bodies strewn 700 yards below, their beaded tunics bloodied. Private John Berkman, his arm bandaged, counted 100 arrows embedded in the bluff's 400-yard perimeter, evidence of 1,500 warriors' relentless assault. Historian D. Brown argues the equal casualties debunked myths of a one-sided massacre, showing the warriors' 3,000 fighters faced a determined foe. The soldiers, firing 10,000 rounds and killing 200 warriors, held 500 rounds by the 27th of June, their survival hinging on General Alfred Terry's 400-man relief force. While the warriors mourned, 200 women's wails echoed from 1,000 lodges. After Custer's 200 men fell, native women and elders, 300 strong, roamed the battlefield, their faces painted with grief, wielding stone mallets to crush the skulls of 50 dead and 10 wounded soldiers. Herendeen, scouting 500 yards from the bluff, saw 20 women, their hands bloodied, mutilating bodies with 100 knife cuts, a ritual rooted in vengeance for 150 fallen kin. 4 soldiers' heads, severed and left in the Sioux camp, bore no bodies, a chilling act witnessed by Scout Mitch Boyer's report. Historian Robert Utley contextualizes this as a cultural response to U.S. encroachment, not mere savagery, noting 6,000 villagers faced relentless campaigns. The soldiers, 78 survivors on the bluff, fired 200 rounds at 100 warriors, their 500 rounds a fading shield against such fury. Scout Isaiah Dorman, a black interpreter in a torn vest, suffered a gruesome fate, his body found with 20 small bullet wounds in his legs, suggesting torture before death. Herendeen, inspecting Dorman's corpse 300 yards from the river, noted 10 knife gashes, signs of personal retribution, possibly for his role with the cavalry. Another soldier, unidentified, bore 15 strips of skin cut from his torso, left 200 yards from Custer's Ridge. Historian Evan Connell calls Dorman's death a targeted act, reflecting native grievances against scouts aiding U.S. forces. The 78 soldiers, their 15 wounded groaning on 10 stretchers, fired 300 rounds at 200 warriors, their 400 rounds dwindling. The warriors' 3,000-strong coalition protecting 6,000 kin showed no mercy to those seen as betrayers. 4 soldiers' severed heads, found in the Sioux camp 1,000 yards from the battlefield, marked a ritual of 200 women mourning 150 dead warriors. Herendeen, scouting with 10 soldiers, saw 50 lodgepole trails leading from the camp, evidence of 1,000 lodges' retreat. The heads, placed on 20 poles, bore no bodies, likely burned or buried, as reported by Scout Nook Byer. Historian James Donovan notes this act, while horrific, symbolized resistance to 10 years of U.S. treaties broken since 1868. The 78 soldiers, their 400-yard bluff littered with 500 cartridge cases, fired 200 rounds at 100 warriors, killing 5. The warriors' 500 captured carbines, taken from Custer's 200 men, bolstered their 3,000 fighters, a grim trophy of their victory. 6 native women, killed by Arikara scouts allied with the cavalry, lay in a 50-yard ravine 700 yards from the village, their bodies pierced by 30 bullets. Herendeen, scouting the ravine, saw 10 beaded dresses torn, signs of a skirmish, costing 10 Arikara rounds. The women, unarmed and gathering water, fell to 20 scouts under Mitch Boyer, their deaths a brutal footnote to the battle's 150 warrior losses. Historian Gregory Micknow calls this indiscriminate vengeance, mirroring U.S. policies against 6,000 native civilians. The 78 soldiers, their 15, wounded on 20 blankets, fired 100 rounds at 50 warriors, their 300 rounds, a fragile defense. The warriors' 3,000 fighters, mourning 200 women's chants, faced no justice for these losses, their pain buried in history's margins. The warriors captured fewer than 100 of Custer's 600 horses, most of the 500 others killed in the battle's chaos, their bodies bloating 300 yards from the ridge. Herendeen, scouting 500 yards from the bluff, counted 50 dead horses, each pierced by 20 arrows, their saddles stripped by 200 warriors. The 78 soldiers, their 100 surviving horses, skeletal after 48 hours without grazing, held 200 pounds of oats, too little to sustain them. Historian John Gray notes the limited horse captures reflected the warriors' focus on survival, not plunder, as 6,000 kin needed mobility. The soldiers, firing 100 rounds at 50 warriors, killed 3. Their 200 rounds of fading hope as 3,000 warriors loomed beyond the 700-yard valley. Herendeen accused Major Marcus Reno of cowardice, claiming his inaction spread fear among the 78 soldiers, their 400-yard bluff, a desperate holdout. Reno, his face pale without his kepi, stood by 20 dead horses, his revolver unfired, as 15 wounded begged for water. Herendeen, his Winchester hot from 50 rounds, heard Reno mock Custer's fate 200 yards away, a sneer echoing his failure to aid 200 doomed men. Historian Robert Utley labels Reno's leadership disastrous, costing 25 lives through indecision. The soldiers, firing 200 rounds at 100 warriors, killed 5, their 200 rounds dwindling. The warriors' 3,000 fighters, led by 200 flag-bearing chiefs, outmaneuvered Reno's 90 men, their 6,000 kin's safety their unyielding cause. Private Dan Neely, dubbed Crackerbox Dan, hid behind a 50-pound crate of 200 hardtack pieces on the bluff, his Springfield unfired for hours. Herendeen, dragging 10 saddles to the barricade, saw Neely, his face pale, duck 100 arrows from 200 warriors 300 yards below. Neely, a 25-year-old recruit, fired 10 rounds in 2 days, his fear paralyzing 20 comrades nearby. Historian Evan Connell calls Neely's cowardice human, reflecting the terror of facing 3,000 warriors. The 78 soldiers, their 15 wounded on 10 stretchers, fired 100 rounds at 50 warriors, killing 2, their 150 rounds a grim tally. The warriors, their 500 captured carbines gleaming, defended 6,000 kin, their resolve unshaken by such frailty. Captain Miles Moreland, nicknamed Aparejo Mickey, lay behind a 100-pound pack saddle for 24 hours, his revolver untouched, as 200 warriors fired 1,000 rounds 400 yards away. Herendeen, piling 20 dead mules, saw Moreland, his gray hair matted, refused to fire his 50 rounds, his eyes fixed on 15 wounded nearby. Moreland, a 40-year veteran, cost 10 soldiers morale, their 400-yard bluff shaken by 500 arrows. Historian James Donovan notes Moreland's inaction crippled Reno's 90 men, facing 3 null warriors. The 78 survivors, firing 100 rounds at 50 warriors, killed 1, their 100 rounds nearly gone. The warriors' 200 mourning women, chanting for 150 dead, wove a legacy of resistance, their 6,000-person village enduring beyond the soldiers' fear. Private Billy Blake, a 22-year-old recruit, feigned injury for 2 days on the 200-foot bluff above the Little Bighorn River, the 25th of June, -26, 1876, his leg wrapped in a torn shirt to avoid combat. Scout George Herendeen, piling 10 saddles into the barricade, saw Blake, his face pale, lying among 15 wounded soldiers, his Springfield rifle untouched. Blake, dodging 500 arrows from 200 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors 400 yards below, fired only 5 rounds, his fear costing 10 comrades morale. Historian Evan Connell calls Blake's ruse a survival instinct, reflecting the terror of facing 3,000 warriors defending 6,000 kin. The 78 survivors, their 400-yard bluff, littered with 500 cartridge cases, fired 100 rounds at 50 warriors, killing 2, their 150 rounds a dwindling shield as General Alfred Terry's 400-man relief force neared. Herendeen, his Winchester hot from 50 rounds, worked tirelessly on the bluff, dragging 20 dead mules to reinforce the barricade under a 90-degree sun. He fired 200 rounds over 2 days, killing 10 warriors 300 yards away, his tattered coat stained with sweat, while 15 wounded groaned on 20 blankets. Herendeen, a 35-year-old frontiersman, hauled 50 pounds of hardtack crates, his hands blistered. Historian Robert Utley praises Herendeen's relentless duty, contrasting Major Marcus Reno's inaction, which left 90 men faltering against 1,500 warriors. The soldiers, firing 200 rounds at 100 warriors, held 100 rounds, their 400-yard perimeter shrinking as 200 native women's mourning chants for 150 fallen kin echoed 700 yards away, a haunting reminder of the warriors' resolve. Lieutenant Donald McIntosh, a 32-year-old officer, died early on the 25th of June when his horse, shot by 10 arrows 200 yards from the river, collapsed during Reno's retreat. McIntosh, in a blue kepi, grabbed a soldier's bay mare, riding 50 yards before 20 bullets from 100 warriors struck him down. Herendeen, covering the retreat, saw McIntosh's body 100 yards from the ford, his saber still clutched. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes McIntosh's death as a symbol of Reno's collapse, with 25 soldiers lost in the 300-yard dash to the grove. The 78 survivors, firing 100 rounds at 50 warriors, held 100 rounds, their 15 wounded on 10 stretchers facing 3,000 warriors, whose 500 captured carbines bolstered their defense of 6,000 villagers. Lieutenant Benjamin Hodgson, a 28-year-old officer, fell wounded in the Little Bighorn River, his horse stumbling 50 yards from the ford on the 25th of June. Hodgson, his uniform soaked, grabbed a horse's tail, pulling himself 20 yards up the bank before a Sioux sharpshooter, 100 yards away, fired a .50 caliber bullet through his chest. Herendeen, 200 yards off, saw Hodgson's body slump, pierced by 10 arrows. Historian James Donovan calls Hodgson's death a tragic loss, one of 15 officers killed in Reno's 125-man retreat. The 78 soldiers, firing 100 rounds at 50 warriors, held 50 rounds, their 400-yard bluff battered by 500 arrows, as 200 native women mourned 150 dead 700 yards away, their 3,000 warriors unyielding. Herendeen mourned Custer's horse, Dandy, shot by 10 arrows on the 25th of June, lying 300 yards from the ridge where 200 soldiers perished. Dandy, a 10-year-old chestnut, whinnied softly, his eyes pleading for water as Herendeen, his coat torn, knelt beside him. The scout, stroking Dandy's neck, recalled 50 rides with Custer over 5 years, his heart heavy. Historian D. Brown notes Dandy's death as a personal blow to survivors, humanizing the loss of 500 cavalry horses. The 78 soldiers, firing 50 rounds at 20 warriors, held 50 rounds, their 15 wounded on 20 blankets facing 1,200 warriors, whose 6,000 kin drove their fierce defense. 200 mourning chants rising from 1,000 lodges. Dandy's death stirred memories of Custer's campaigns for Herendeen, who saw 20 battles since 1871, riding 1,000 miles across Montana. Dandy, carrying Custer's 200-pound frame, galloped 50 miles in a day, his loyalty etched in 10 scars. Herendeen, wiping dust from his eyes, recalled Custer's white hat, lost 200 yards from the ridge where 200 men fell. Historian Gregory Micknow calls such losses emotional anchors, tying survivors to 600 dead comrades. The 78 soldiers, firing 50 rounds at 20 warriors, held 30 rounds. Their 400-yard bluff, a battered holdout as 3,000 warriors, protecting 6,000 kin, left 500 scalped bodies, 200 women's wails, a grim chorus 700 yards off. The 78 soldiers chewed 100 pounds of raw bacon and 200 hardtack pieces on the 26th of June, choking without water after 36 hours, their lips bleeding. Herendeen, his stomach empty, spat 10 crumbs, his tongue swollen. Private Berkman, his arm bandaged, gnawed 20 grass blades, vomiting 5 times. The 15 wounded, on 20 blankets, begged for 10 gallons of water, their cries drowned by 500 arrows from 200 warriors 400 yards below. Historian Robert Utley notes starvation weakened 20 soldiers, with 5 collapsing. The 78 men, firing 50 rounds at 20 warriors, held 20 rounds, their 400-yard bluff facing 1,200 warriors, whose 6,000 kin fueled a defense marked by 200 mourning chants from 1,000 lodges. The valley's silence on the 27th of June, broken by 200 native mourning chants 700 yards away, unnerved the 78 soldiers, their 400-yard bluff strewn with 600 cartridge cases. Herendeen, his rifle propped, heard 50 tom-toms, signaling 150 warrior deaths mourned by 200 women in 1,000 lodges. The warriors, 3,000 strong, left 50 campfires burning 500 yards off, their 500 captured carbines gleaming. Historian D. Brown calls these chants a shared grief, paralleling the soldiers' loss of 600 comrades. The 78 men, firing 20 rounds at 10 warriors, held 10 rounds, their 15 wounded facing 20 days of recovery as 6,000 native kin retreated, their resilience enduring beyond the battle's scars. Herendeen stood watch on the 26th of June night, pacing 200 yards outside Reno's tent, his Winchester slung, hearing Reno's drunken scorn for Custer's 200 dead men. Reno, gulping from a 10-gallon keg, mocked Custer as Murat of the army, his voice slurred 50 yards from 15 wounded. Herendeen, his boots worn, counted 20 soldiers asleep amid 600 cartridge cases, their 400-yard bluff silent, save 200 native chants 700 yards off. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick labels Reno's mockery disgraceful, costing 25 lives through inaction. The 78 men, firing 10 rounds at 5 warriors, held 10 rounds, facing 3,000 warriors, whose 6,000 kin drove a defense etched in 150 deaths and 200 wails. The sergeant, likely Herendeen, longed for the past on the 27th of June, recalling Custer's laughter over 50 campfires since 1871, riding 1,000 miles with 600 men. Standing on the 400-yard bluff, his coat patched, he saw 200 scalped bodies 300 yards from Custer's ridge, Dandy's corpse among 500 horses. He dreamed of 20 battles, Custer's white hat waving 200 yards off. Historian James Donovan calls this nostalgia a survivor's burden, tying 78 men to 600 dead. The soldiers, firing 10 rounds at 5 warriors, held 5 rounds, their 15 wounded facing 3,000 warriors' legacy, as 200 native women mourned 150 kin in 1,000 lodges, 700 yards away, their 6,000-person village unbroken. The Little Bighorn's Valley, scarred by the clash of the 25th of June, -27, 1876, fell silent as 200 Lakota and Cheyenne women mourned 150 fallen warriors, their chants rising from 1,000 lodges housing 6,000 kin. Scout George Herendeen, standing on the 400-yard bluff, his patched coat heavy with dust, gazed at 600 scalped bodies, including 200 of Custer's men, their loss etched in 500 dead horses like dandy. The 78 survivors, clutching 5 rounds, bore the weight of Major Marcus Reno's inaction, which cost 25 lives, while 3,000 warriors, led by Sitting Bull, defended their homeland with 500 captured carbines. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick calls this a tragic collision, where both sides fought with fierce resolve, leaving 300 dead across the 700-yard battlefield. The warriors' victory, rooted in protecting 6,000 kin, was no mere triumph, but a fleeting stand against relentless U.S. campaigns, as historian D. Brown notes, with 10 broken treaties since 1868 fueling their resistance. The soldiers suffering 36 hours without water, 15 wounded on 20 blankets mirrored the native struggle, a shared anguish often buried in Custer's myth. Herendeen's nostalgia for 20 battles and Custer's laughter reflects a human toll, with 78 survivors carrying 600 comrades' ghosts. The 200 mourning chants, echoing 700 yards away, wove a legacy of resilience for a people facing erasure, their 1,000 lodges a defiant heart against encroaching odds. As we trace the blood-soaked grass of Little Bighorn, where 3,000 warriors outfought 600 soldiers, a question lingers. How do we honor the courage of both sides' 150 warriors and 200 soldiers fallen while reckoning with the broken promises that sparked this war, leaving 6,000 native kin to mourn their way of life?